Welcome back to Clinic Conversations. This episode is how to start a clinic in a pandemic. So welcome, Alyssa and Kylie. We've got Kylie here from Cosmedic Collective in the lovely Bathurst.
Orange.
No,
it's an hour up the road.
Cosmedic
I always
Collective.
get Bathurst and Orange mixed up.
It's all regional. Yeah.
Well, I went to boarding school in Bathurst, so for some reason I had you pegged as being in Bathurst, but yep. I've done, that's right. I think we had a conversation about how I said I'd done some Scottish dancing in Orange when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So tell us, you have a relatively new clinic, and you opened your doors when?
We were meant to open, Kate, on the 1st of September, and we ended up opening, which was lockdown. We were not as unfortunate as the city with our lockdown. Was much more brief, but still it was long enough. We ended up opening on the 24th of September.
In 2020?
2021.
2021.
Like 6 months ago.
Okay, so at the time of recording this, it's the end of March 2022. Obviously, we've had nearly 2 years of lockdowns and pandemic and all sorts of stuff. So I wasn't 100% sure when you started your clinic and whether you had, for some reason, I got the impression that you might have started and then we suddenly went into the first lockdown, but no.
No. So I have been my own business. I've been an injector for 10 years. I was a theatre nurse by training, and then I went full-time in injecting in 2018. And that's when I rebranded the Cosmedic Collective. And the reason for that name was it was medical services, cosmetic sort of medical cosmetic services in a collective of locations. And at my peak, I was at 12 different clinics. So my first lockdown experience in 2020 was very different to my lockdown experience in 2021. In 2020, I had no income, but I also had no overheads because I was contracting into other people's businesses. I've been in Orange for 4 years now. There's a demand for this sort of service. The culture has shifted, and the standalone medical cosmetic in Sydney for a long time. I think Orange was ready for it. So I opened that. Was due to launch during lockdown in 2021. So even though it was only 3 weeks of lockdown, the stress was a lot different because I had overheads, I had staff that I'd brought on full-time salaries and equipment to repay and rent to pay. So yeah, the 2020 and 2021 lockdowns were very different.
So Kylie, if we do a bit of a timeline, so essentially March 2020, the pandemic hit. At what stage of your decision-making were you around opening up your clinic when we all just went, oh my God? Where were you at?
It was very much a 3 to 5 year plan, Alyssa. So it wasn't super on the horizon at that point. What accelerated it was this beautiful clinic that I have was one of the clinics where I contracted into, and I always said to the person who owned it, if you sell, give me the first right of refusal. So that's what brought it forward a lot. But it was very much a 3 to 5 plan. In 2020, it wasn't really on my radar. I was just contracting into other people's businesses, and yeah.
And was the reason that the clinic came onto the market was because of the pandemic and we were, business changed forevermore for all of us?
I think it was a combination of factors. For this particular business owner, she had this clinic here, and it was a beauty salon, and she had one in Bathurst, which is just down the road. And she got married around this time last year, actually 1 year ago today. And her husband is the CEO of the SCG. So her focus is now from Bathurst down to Sydney, and Orange was just personally not a level for her. Throw in the pandemic and a few other things, she was ready to get rid of the space.
So it's almost like the universe conspired to kind of give you a bit of a kick or a bit of a handball in the right direction.
It really did. It was something that I've always wanted to do, but it went from a 3 to 5 year plan to, it was still a twinkle in the eye I think she first broached me about it in March or April 2021, and then we were open in September. So within a few months, I'd formed a full business plan, staff, and I brought that goal, which was always there. And that's where goal setting, I suppose, is important, because I had a plan of what the end picture was, but I just had to bring it all forward really quick and in a time of a pandemic, which is not ideal. But the opportunity presented itself and I wasn't going to miss it.
What you said, not ideal, but what on earth made you bring it forward instead of delaying it? Because any other person, Kylie, would have gone, you know what, I can move it to a longer timeline, not a shorter timeline. What part of you did you tap into to get to that place?
Absolutely right. And I think it's with any area. So for me, I was looking culturally at Orange. To give you a bit of a backdrop, Orange has got 45,000 people. We just tipped the scales last year of more people born in Sydney than born in Orange. So people are looking for those Sydney services. I'd been injecting here for a while. There are fly-in and fly-out injectors. There was already one existing chain and another chain was coming. So I thought, if I don't do this now, culturally, I think up until this point, Orange was not ready for it. Anti-wrinkle treatments and medical cosmetic treatments still carry a big taboo in the country. But I have noticed a shift with the shift of the Sydney people. And I knew that if I didn't take this opportunity now and waited to ride things out, I might miss my opportunity because someone's going to come and set something up. And I wanted it to be me, the local, to get my foot in the door. Yeah, so it was more of a cultural, if I didn't do it, I'm sure someone was going to come and do it soon. I wanted to be the first one.
This probably opens the door to like, we haven't really defined yet what Cosmedic Collective does and the services you offer, because you're not like what we might call a run-of-the-mill beauty salon who also does hair removal, a bit of laser. You're very specialist services.
That's right. Yeah, it's hard to get across to people what a medical cosmetic service is. I mean, if you live in a major city, you're probably aware there's a lot of them. But our focus is skin. So it doesn't mean just injectables. It's we have laser for pigmentation and vascular. Most people are skin type 1 and 2 out here, lots of fair skin and sun damage. We do PRP, threads, that sort of stuff. But the collective nature has changed. So with those are our core services. And then we rent rooms to people who complement that core service. So it basically comes down to self-care. So we have a beauty therapist, a tattooist, a girl that does HIFU and body sculpting and things like that. And they all complement our core service. So it's now, rather than being one service in a collective of locations, it's a collective of services in one location.
So that's worked really well. Kylie, you said that when you were anticipating opening your clinic, that there was one chain already in existence in Orange and one on the way. I've got a couple of questions. First one is, did that second chain come in? Because that would scare the pants off me in an area with only 45,000 people. Yes. How did that go? And has that worked in your advantage to prime your market around cosmetic injectables?
That is a great question, Alyssa. I remember a good girlfriend of mine had a clinic in Double Bay and had a chain clinic open with a common wall to her. And I said, surely you wouldn't lose many people in Double Bay. She said, I lost half, but half of those half came back and the other quarter I didn't really want anyway. And this second chain has opened 200 metres from my clinic, but it's in a shopping centre. I'm a standalone building on the street with private parking. They have a giant sign in their window that says nurses wanted, no experience required, course preferred. So what I am doing is trying to, you're right, there is a limited demographic, but I'm trying really hard with my marketing to assert what the difference is when you come here. So I'm not putting anyone else down, I'm staying in my lane, but I'm just trying to, and I suppose it comes down to education, showing my experience, showing that I'm going to these conferences, these courses, training, education, and just trying to elevate myself from that quality perspective. Yeah.
And even just the background research that you did, like you clearly knew before you opened the doors, before you took on this challenge, you clearly knew your demographics of the town or city that you're in. You knew the environment, you had read the what was happening, not just from the pandemic perspective, but from the number of people from Sydney who are now in Orange, all of this kind of stuff. Like you went into this with your eyes pretty well wide open.
Absolutely. My husband and I, we have a business coach, and we sat down and literally locked ourselves in a room for 2 days and we ran numbers of what, because I had an existing client base, patient base, and we ran the numbers on the demographics, on the number of people coming to Sydney, expected, projected sales, what we're currently making. We looked at the industries that were in the area, like we really ran it up, down, left and right. And you're absolutely right. Having lived in the town for 4 years, I had established those personal connections. I'm known around town. And I think it was good to do it that way rather than just jumping in. It's a huge jump if you don't know exactly the environment you're walking into. But I had a very clear understanding of the kind of environment I was going into.
Sure. And you obviously also knew, as you said, the town you'd lived there, even though it was you're a relative newcomer if you've been there for 4 years.
You're not local until someone is like buried in the graveyard. Like, yeah.
As the doctor's daughter in Cootamundra, and you know, we were in Harden, and then we moved to Cootamundra when I was about 5, and we lived there for a good 10 years. But I understand what it's like. You kind of have to know the small town, the different sorts of politics with a small p and a big P.
Cliquey.
There can be cliques, there can be, you know, nuances there. So we certainly had, when I was a kid, we certainly had various different issues within the town, and the big medical practice split in half, and there was a big decision making, and people clearly went one way or the other for various reasons that I won't get into. But you knew that. I mean, you had lived in Orange, you had an understanding, and you'd started the process of becoming local, although you've got another 30 years or so.
Yeah, got another 30 years to go. That's right. But there's the chains, but there's also the fly in, fly outs. So with the chains, look, well, my argument is, you know, I am local, which I live here.
Yeah.
And then the fly in, fly outs, that's the other thing. Like I will see you at the school gate. So it creates that element of trust, which I think is very important. People know you're not going to just sod off.
Yep. The other thing with becoming local in a small town, a relatively small town, is that if you have weathered a storm, it expedites things. So you have weathered a storm of the pandemic. So if you go through floods or fires or, you know, that sort of stuff in a local community, then you usually can expedite that process of becoming a local, because you stayed there during that. You didn't escape back to Sydney or take the easy option of going back to where you came from.
And there's a lot of value, and I genuinely enjoy it. I've become the vice president of my local country women's association.
Yes.
Can't bake a scone to save my life. But being involved in the community does count for a lot here. So if they see you out there doing things within the community, that counts for an awful lot.
That's massive. And you've been doing so much in the local community recently. I even saw on your social media, you've been highlighting the things that you're getting involved in, and you've been really busy the last couple of months.
Almost too busy. I think a lot of stuff got pushed off from COVID at the end of last year, and we found ourselves a bit overcommitted the last few weekends. But it is very important when you're in a town like this to have a social presence, and that shows the difference between you and a chain, or you and a fly in, fly out injector. So the thing that I'm fast learning, which I'm sure we'll get to, is all the hats that one has to wear. But that is one of the hats when you're in a town like this, is a social presence.
You talk about your hats and not being able to make a scone, which I think is hilarious. As somebody who's in an industry in a small town that's essentially perceived as a vanity industry, where we have people who are, you know, agricultural industry, has there ever been any pushback from the community about what you do, or a way to finesse that?
Yeah, great question. And yes, there has been. And I'm very passionate about it. When I started in this industry, to be honest, when I was a theatre nurse and I was doing this on the side in Sydney for the plastic surgeons that I worked for, I saw it as an industry that provided a bit of lifestyle balance. As I go down the path and I really enjoy what I do, I enjoy the outcomes that it makes people feel. But I have found the difference between the city and the country. Women, who are our main demographic, really struggle to give themselves permission for self-care, whether it's our services or any self-care. They do everything for everyone else, and it's almost seen as a sign of weakness. And the stereotype around the medical cosmetic stuff is still incredibly strong. And I have to put out a very consistent message about breaking that stereotype down. And I'm involved with a lot of other businesses who work in a different space, but just having a conversation around self-care in the country.
Do you think it's helpful that your starting point is skin health and skincare? It's not cosmetic injectables and enhancing lips and cheeks, but it's about skin. Do you think that's been a useful segue to like break into the market?
Absolutely. Like there's that saying, when all you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But the fact that we're so holistic, and honestly, if you book in for any service, even if it's just a brow wax, you're going to get a 6-page form from us, because we don't want to hit you with forms every time. But it is holistic. It takes a whole history. And some of the questions are things like, why are you coming in today? What is it that you want to feel? So we're starting to have those conversations from the very start, and then we can plan a very holistic treatment that's tailored to them and doesn't make them feel like we're just selling them a service.
Yeah, I love that. So sort of 6 months or so in, what do you wish you knew 6 months ago that you know now?
quite a few things. Some days, the days are rare, but some days you've got all the balls in the air and you're like, look at me go. But most of the days, sometimes all the balls seem to be on the ground. I now have staff and I'm not great with confrontations, having difficult conversations. I've learnt to hire slowly, fire quickly. I've had to let someone go already who wasn't a good cultural fit for the business. And in fact, it wasn't until she left that I realised how much of a not a good cultural fit she was and how quickly that shifted. But for that to happen in the first 6 months was challenging. I've had to obviously learn to delegate, whereas previously I was an injector going into other people's business and it all stopped with me. I have a practice manager now. I have to give things off to her that I held quite tightly, but learning to give off control and prioritise. I'm making money by being in the room injecting. So things that I can get other people to do, I have to let go of, as Elsa says.
And is staffing, you mentioned staffing, I mean, everyone has staffing challenges, at least from time to time. Do you think there is a big difference between the staffing and the hiring, and particularly the firing in a relatively small country town?
Yeah, it's incredibly hard. It's incredibly difficult. And in any town, good news, I've tried to be very transparent with the team. I try to keep very open lines of communication with them. However, in a town, good news travels fast, but bad news travels really fast. So you do have to be careful what you share and who you share it with. I've had people come up to me in the street and say, oh, I hear you're not doing very well financially. I'm like, what the heck? We're doing fine. But where did you hear that from? Like, the rumour mill is strong. So that there's some of the things that I've learned. I've also learned, so my husband is in the business. Does all the operations and administrations. And look, you both know you could work around the clock 24/7 on your business and still not have everything done. So it's about drawing those lines in the sand for yourself. Otherwise you sound like this and you end up running yourself into the ground.
You're a bit croaky. One of the things you shared with us in the Bravura Beauties the other day, Kylie, was some tension between you and your husband around doing a payroll on a Sunday.
Yes.
I'd like to tell the listeners a little bit about how you manage that.
I sit outside and studiously ignore him, but he likes to do payroll on a Sunday because he thinks it needs to go in on a Sunday night. But when I've worked, I'm getting up at 5, I'm working after the kids are in bed at night, still on the business, and I'm in the business during the day. I've really made a big point of carving out that weekend time for myself, and he will sit inside and bang away on the keyboard in a very aggravated manner, huff and moan and whinge about it, but I will not engage on a Sunday because I will lose my mind if I don't carve out that protected time.
And for the listeners, Kylie, just remind us how old your children are.
So I have my youngest who started kindergarten this year. I have a daughter who's 5 and a son who's 7. So I feel like we're coming into the light there. You know, we don't have to take strollers and things like that anymore, but they are still young and they're very dependent. The nice thing about this is their first few years of life, when I was in multiple other clinics, I was away. I remember my son's school called me because he could split his head open and I was in Goulburn. I couldn't come and get him. My husband had to do that. Whereas with me here and us both being in the business, I could do canteen every Friday afternoon. I can pop out for assemblies and things like that. And that is definitely one of the highlights of having your own business. It's got to be some perks, right?
That flexibility. Yeah, when you truly can be your own boss. But
yeah,
we could work on our businesses 24/7 because we become slaves to them because there's so much, particularly in the beginning, that you need to do yourself, you know, establish the foundations. What was your lead up and your decision making to engaging your first employee?
My first employee has been on my radar for a few years. Like I said previously, I've gauged the local area, who's doing what, where. She's a very different background to me. I was a theatre nurse who fell into this. She was a dermal therapist who went on to become a registered nurse, and she worked in the top dermatology here in town for 7 years. So skin and energy-based devices were her strength, and she was doing some injecting. We used to bump into each other in conferences and things like that. We're the only 2 people in Orange that I've ever seen at any of these conferences. So instantly I knew she had an interest in, you know, learning and improving, and a slightly different skill set to me or a different background. So I always knew that she'd be someone that it's kind of a case in town. You're either with them or you're against them kind of thing. And I thought we would be so much stronger together. But getting her across was not easy. She had a very cushy job, 9 to 5, Monday to Thursday, 9 to 1 on a Friday, a month off over Christmas. So it was a bit of a leap of faith on her part to come along with me for this ride.
How did you convince her, Kylie? And what did the dermatologists think about it?
Oh, Well, the dermatologist never paid for her conference, and she always had to take annual leave and things like that. So my selling point was like, I want to grow, I want to build this business. Eventually, I'd like her to buy and have a real partnership. So sort of showing her the future opportunities. Can't pay you much now, but look at what we could do down the track. I too contracted into a dermatologist, the other dermatologist across the road. And my dermatologist is very supportive. She always said, there's a space here. You need to go and put that stake in the ground before someone else does. And she still refers people to us, and we refer people back to them. My nurse's dermatologist was horrendous. They walked her out on the day she gave her notice, a month's notice. And when people came looking for her, they're like, we don't know, she's left the industry, which is ridiculous in a town like this because she's only up the street. Made them look like fools, really. But it didn't go very well at all.
That's probably a lovely segue into a strong clinical question. So your referral pathways for, mental health or abnormal lesions in a small town or a complication, how have you developed those referral pathways?
Yeah, we've got a fantastic referral pathway. There's 2 doctors that we refer to. See, we won't do any pigmentation treatment unless they've had a skin check in the last 12 months. So we've got doctors that we refer for that. We do vein treatments, but sometimes they require further ultrasounds or sclerotherapy prior to having their veins done. We refer for that. I have a GP who specialises in women's mental health because it's rare, because of the way we've marketed ourselves and the way we've put ourselves in the market, we sort of attract 35 to 55-year-olds. But we do get the occasional person within that bracket and the occasional young person that comes in with some severe dysmorphic sort of ideas about what we could do for them. And we won't do them, especially like we have a strong moral and ethical code. Actually, it actually turned out quite well from us from a marketing perspective. A young girl came in, she was 18 in 2 days. She wanted 2 meals of lip filler and she was throwing out so many red flags. We referred her on. She didn't take our advice and just went elsewhere, but then she went on to we've got a Facebook group here called Spread the Word Orange, which is where people go on to basically just trash each other, and said that, Cosmedic Collective wouldn't take my money and blah, 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 but actually turned into a positive marketing spin because people are going, here's someone who turned down money because they didn't think it was the right thing. So we do have a strong referral pathway.
So that very much reinforced your ethical stance, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And then we have also in a town like this, if we don't think it's ethical or moral, or if we don't think it's safe, even if we don't think it's going to be aesthetically pleasing, we have to be very conscious of that. We don't need someone going down to the Parkview Hotel on a Friday night with giant duck lips saying they've been to our clinic. And then we also have referrals. There's a surgeon that I inject for in Sydney, and I've been trying to tell him for years, you've got to come out. We don't have a plastic surgeon in Orange. So he's coming out now and operating. So we have a very nice referral pathway for our patients that want other sort of body things done.
Does that plastic surgeon do just cosmetic work, or does he do general plastic surgery?
He does general plastic surgery as well. So yeah, wow. Women here in Orange, if they have breast cancer, they can get a mastectomy, but no one can do a reconstruction. They have to go to Sydney. So that's huge. So what we're doing, here's post-operative care. He's buying packages from us prior to people having surgery. So if they want post-op scar reduction, or if they want to have like a makeover, mummy makeover with a bit of anti-wrinkle and dermal fillers, he's pre-purchasing packages from us. So we've got a good referral pathway with surgeons, mental health physicians. I even rang the eye surgeon at the local hospital and said, I hope I never have to call you, but if I was to ever have a patient experiencing vision disturbances, I don't want to send them to the ED. Our emergency department, our health district here has a landmass bigger than Germany. They're not going to know what to do with an occlusion. They're very generalised. So can I ring you? So we've set those parts in place. It's so important.
It is.
So have you run through the scenarios of having a visual disturbance and what you would do? Have you role played anything with that person?
Yeah, so when I worked in Sydney, I worked in the Institute of Academic Surgery, and surgical simulations were a big part of our job. So we literally run simulations here. Any high laser expires, we're drawing it up, we practice with it. We do a lot of elective high lasing for lips and things like that anyway. But we have a box, a red box, and next to the red box is a red folder with if this, do that. So your high laser protocols in here. If vision disturbances, call this number. So yeah, we've got a very clear risk pathway, I suppose. And that comes from years of working in an operating theatre, I think.
Yeah, and just going back to what you were saying about the patient that tried to become a patient and that you wouldn't accept for various reasons.
And it's hard.
It's interesting. Like, it's hard in a small town, and it's hard when you see that sort of negative press in the local Facebook group. But having said that, there is a sense of FOMO that comes from that. Like, some people just really find that very attractive. When I have worked for a number of different people and said, oh, this business coach doesn't accept everyone that knocks on the door. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So there is like a sense of exclusivity about it. So it's like, oh, well, was I a chosen one? Or
Yes.
and I know it's not as simple as being a chosen one. It's not that. It's not nothing personal about the person who came forward. It's not because she had blonde hair or blue eyes or whatever she had. It was because her request was outside the area that you have deemed as being ethical or appropriate.
That's right. And that's why our consultation process, initial consultation, is so in depth, because, you know, often it's around education and taking the time to educate them. They'll often come in and say, I hate my nasolabial folds, can you feel it? And then you've got to get out the chart with the subcutaneous volume loss, explain, you know, we've got to restore volume where it's lost first, and educate them as to what you think the best treatment would be. And if they say, no, I really just want this filled, well, that's at our discretion whether we decide to go ahead with that or not. Same with going over previous people's fillers. We make a rule of not going over previous fillers, and we try to talk them into dissolving and starting again, because we're taking on that risk.
Kylie, you talked about the trigger for your first employee, and look, I thought what you presented to her was absolutely spectacular.
It was basically, come with me, let's jump off this cliff together.
And I think it's interesting that you employed a clinician first, but who was your second staff member, and what was your trigger for that?
Well, they were both at the same time, Alyssa, the nurse and the then receptionist, who's now been elevated to practice manager. She was the receptionist when it was the beauty therapy here. So she was familiar with the systems and processes. We were keeping the same booking system and online processes. But she was really nervous because she'd only worked in a beauty sort of space. She's qualified as a makeup artist. And she was really afraid about her lack of knowledge in the medical space. But as I've said to you too before, she was previously, when she was leaving school, the drive-through McDonald's Employee of the Year. If you can do nighttime drive-through McDonald's, it says something about your time management, your systems and processes. And then during the first lockdown in 2020, she worked for Telstra in conflict resolution and customer service. So I was like, I can teach you anything else from there. And she's young and she's very enthusiastic. And yeah, she just runs with what I give her. The previous manager here had her on a very low clearance within the system. I've given her the highest clearance. She can see everything she needs to see within the business. I don't micromanage her or write her list. I just say, just do what needs to be done. And she does. She's great. And I think it's just an example. If you show she's studying leadership and management at TAFE, if you show some interest in it and give them some freedom, I think if you've chosen the right person, they're going to repay you back.
It sounds like you really hired for attitude.
Yeah, I really, really did. Like she didn't know the difference between Botox and fillers when she started, but she does now. And
yeah.
She knows all about our medical. Originally, when people would come in asking about our medical range, skincare and retinols and things like that, I'd pop out of the office and come and take over. I sit there now and listen to her. She is as well-versed in skin as I am. So it's just about finding the person.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because Lizzie Boots, of course, came and spoke to us in Bravura Beauties and said, you know, her rule has always been, after decades of being in the hiring industry and particularly specialising in HR for clinics, that she always recommends hiring for attitude over skill set, because you can teach skills and knowledge, but you can't teach attitude. And it's interesting that you mentioned McDonald's, because years ago when I was 18, I was put in charge of my first restaurant, and people used to come and speak to me and say, oh, I've only worked at McDonald's. But I would say to them, if you've worked at McDonald's for 12 months, that to me was like jumping a hurdle. If they worked at somewhere like that or somewhere similar for 3 months, that was not enough of a hurdle for me to jump. But if they had worked there for 12 months or more, then I would find their attitudes were very often really quite good, and I could teach them anything.
As someone who hasn't hired anyone for McDonald's or worked at McDonald's, what is it about those people that is attractive?
They have to be, everything is systemized in the back of McDonald's. They have to be incredibly efficient. Every single movement, like they can't double move back and forth. Everything has to be very fluid, very efficient. there's no time for inefficiencies. So I'd say, I don't know about UK, but I'd say efficiency is probably the biggest one.
It's a big one, that they are efficient, they have a process, they have to be taught how to do things, but they're also generally, I mean, McDonald's are fairly franchised, but I don't think they survive very well unless they have good customer service. So, I mean, occasionally we might go in and find someone who isn't brilliant. I did find someone, I went through the drive-through the other day with my teenage daughter who's addicted to McDonald's. And the person, I said, oh, she was a bit average. She was very serviceable, but not very friendly. And that's the exception. Whereas other fast food chains that I won't mention, I go into them occasionally. Again, I've got 2 teenage girls, so I go into them occasionally, and I find their level of hygiene doesn't look, from a customer perspective, is not necessarily the same standard as McDonald's. Generally,
They'll dress the same, they'll present well.
Yep. And the customer service. So I think they do have quite a good standard in terms of teaching people processes and all of that sort of stuff.
One of the things that both of you have mentioned is systems. So when it came to your policies and procedures, how did you go developing that? Because it can be so time consuming.
Oh my goodness, yes. And this is where I'm very, very blessed in the industry. I have some good industry mentors who have been incredibly generous with their knowledge. So things that we're learning as we go along, we've been creating a log, putting it into a folder, adding to it, things that I didn't think I needed to write down, like turn up 15 minutes before you're due to start, or things like that. It all turns out everything needs to go in the book. But mine is, and I'll call out to her, her name's Kelly George. She runs a clinic, which is exactly what I've modeled my clinic on in Tamworth, with a very similar demographic. She was very generous with me and said, like, this is what I've learned in my first 6 months. Here you go, which is, she didn't have to do that as her own intellectual property. So it was very, very, very helpful. In terms of systems and processes, because we run a collective of services here, we don't want every time you come in to get hit with a form when you're here for a different service. So we have an online booking system that speaks directly to our FPOS. Everything reconciles across. When you book online, you get a consultation form. Your consent goes out 48 hours prior. So all that sort of stuff is all systemized.
So you basically inherited your online system.
Yeah.
Has that worked well for you? Has there been any issues that it's not been fit for purpose going from beauty into medical?
Yeah, it's a good question. We didn't have to inherit that system. We bought the database, but we could have exported it to any system we want, and we sat down and looked at a heap of them. Fresh Up, Clinic to Cloud, Clinico, where we ended up sticking with this one, Katomba, because it reconciles to the FPOS, which is just so easy. But yes, it has been clunky. You have to find a system where the team are willing to work with you, because we're coming across things that they haven't had to deal with before. One thing that I found interesting, they've got a heap of forms that you can choose to utilise or not utilise. They didn't have a follow-up form. They had a pre-questionnaire form, but there was no opportunity to send follow-up through the system. But they've since rectified that now. We can send follow-up forms. So you've got to find a system. None of them are going to fit what you need, but you've got to find a system that most fits what you need, and a team that are willing to work with you.
And Kylie, a lot of people buy businesses and they essentially, as you say, buy the database. Was
that's
the
all we bought.
database up to date and useful? Was there any limitations to your database?
Retrospectively, no, it was not worth the value that I paid for it, and that was a good lesson. You know, there was a database of 20,000 people, and I'm going, oh my God, amazing. It's a 45,000 person town. Some of those hadn't been updated for 5 years. I don't think there was a huge amount of value in that. And I'm glad I didn't buy the business in its current form, because originally when she first approached me to sell, she wanted to sell me a beauty therapy business. I'm not a beauty therapist. So I just did an asset purchase. I bought the beds, the computers, and the basic equipment that sat within, and took over the lease.
It's interesting as well that you mentioned the database, and there's a whole strategy and system around reactivating a database that a lot of people don't understand how to do that effectively. So it's interesting to go, okay, well, you've got a database, but to know enough to ask the question, well, what sort of proportion of that is active at the moment? Do you think that would have made a big difference?
It would have made a big difference, but there's no way of measuring that in the system. So I was sort of buying blindly on that, and I have purchased a few things that came in the asset purchase, and I was like, I probably shouldn't have bought that. But you kind of learn as you go. Yeah,
it seems like a shortcut, doesn't it? And anything that seems like a shortcut in the beginning, because
it's attractive.
So overwhelmed. You mentioned in the beginning about how many hats you have to wear.
Yes. Yes, you do. You're the boss lady sort of hat. You're the clinician. You're head of the marketing and the branding. You're also having to make sure compliance and insurances, you're doing the payroll. There's an awful lot. There's an awful lot.
And on a personal level, you're also balancing being the boss lady, but also having a family and having your husband in the business. How do you manage that? Because a lot of us would go, well, there's no way I could do that.
It has its days. We have things that complement each other. I'm a doer, I suppose is the best way to describe me. Go forth and do, and then figure out how you're going to do it as you go. Whereas my husband would nearly suffer from analysis paralysis. He is a huge analyst. His background was he was an analyst. So sometimes we complement each other. He says, before you take this jump, have you considered A, B, C, and D? And sometimes he needs me to say, let's go do this thing. So, but it definitely comes to loggerheads sometimes. And what we've actually learned is to park a lot of our arguments, because during the week, we don't have time to be thrashing these things out. And we actually see a couples counsellor once a month. And whether it's personal or professional, if we can't come to a quick agreement, we just say, let's park that there and we'll thrash this out at the scheduled time once a month with a mediator. Literally, need a mediator.
So you've got actually quite a wide support team. So you've talked to us about your staff, your couples counsellor, your business coach, your dermatology and your GP referral system, Kelly George, who's that clinical mentor.
Yeah.
Other people,
you guys,
us, yes,
the Bravura Beauties.
Yes, yeah.
I also work, so compliance-wise, my prescribers are Fresh Clinics. And I work under them in terms of compliance and scripting, but they also have a community, like a WhatsApp group, a community for people who inject, which is incredibly helpful when you're a regional person. They actually do dinners once every few months for people to come together. I went to one last week in Sydney. Did you know rich people can rent out their house like Airbnb for private events? It was in a private mansion in Mossman. The family left, Fresh came in, there was live music, there was nibbles and networking, and then they sat us at a dinner table and they thought about the plan of who sits where. So they sat newer injectors in one area, more experienced injectors together, clinic owners together, and they sat me with a bunch of regional clinic owners from Newcastle, Central Coast. Amazing. And then we all went into the living room and dialed in with the other states and had a clinical presentation. It was like fantastic. Wow. So that's a real community as well. Yeah.
That is absolutely brilliant.
It was great.
So if you were to do this again, or if you were to give advice, your top advice to someone who's considering going down this path at the moment, what advice would you give them?
Well, before you do anything, and it's hard as a clinician, because we're clinical, your two main weaknesses, I think the first thing to do is know your market, know your numbers. What are you buying this product for? What are you selling it for? How many potential patients could you get? What's the competition? Or not so much competition, but what else is out there? Where else are they going? I don't really see anyone in Orange as competition as such. I'm aware of who's doing what, but I've got my lane. What's your point of difference? You've really got to analyze the market and whether you could make it, because there are overheads. I mean, tens of thousands of dollars a month to keep this place open before we even break even. So you've really got to know that the market is there. And then you need to know who you're going to lean on. So you're absolutely right. I've got my tribe of people, including someone that helps me now with marketing and branding, because that stuff takes time. I've had to really hone my message about what I'm about and what makes me different in a town like this. So yeah, really analyze your market and sit down with someone who can help you with that, and from like a financial analyst.
And have you found, for example, hiring someone who knows the industry is a big difference to someone who doesn't? I mean, whether it's marketing or whether it's something else?
Yeah, it's interesting. So my business coach doesn't know a fig about the cosmetic medical industry, but they know a lot about local regional businesses. So that's where they have value. But then I need to counter that with someone who knows the industry, even though they don't necessarily know my local area. So you've got to kind of cover off all those different things. What we do is quite unique. So you need people who know your local area and people who know your industry. And sometimes they're separate people.
When it comes to hiring someone to do your marketing, did you find someone who understood the industry or knew regional?
I held on to the marketing, but I got someone who understood branding, because again, that's not something they teach you at university. So she said, see, I don't have my own Instagram page. I'm not big on that sort of stuff. I am learning. When someone scrolls through Instagram, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know, Kate, they need to get a quick idea of what you're about fast. So you need no more than 6 pillars of what you're about. So my 5 main pillars are: I'm local, I'm experienced, I'm highly qualified. Duck egg blue is our brand color, so that needs to come up a lot, and befores and afters. And if they keep seeing those messages repeated, and see, I didn't know that. I was just throwing stuff up on Instagram that I thought looked good.
And even going to your Facebook page, one thing I learned several years ago that I thought was great was if someone had a quick flash of your Facebook page, or probably the same on Instagram page, if they just saw the page, which we know they don't come to the page very often, but if they did just come to the page, maybe they go to your website, click the link, go to your Facebook page, it's like a bumper sticker, your page.
Yeah.
So in those sort of 2 or 3 seconds, do they know what you do and who you do it for?
Yeah, you have to curate that. And I've got someone to help me with that. So I plan the posts and the content based around those sorts of things. I have a practice manager who's getting me down for young people because all those messages are quite serious. She says, your Instagram is so boring. I'm like, no, it's a serious thing. But she's made me introduce reels. I have to do reels. I won't do TikTok dances. I draw the line there. But she's got me doing these funny reels to try and get the message across in a less serious fashion. So yeah, that was a learning curve.
That's great. I mean, the thing is that you've got to balance, like you were saying, you've got to get your clear messaging about the seriousness and the fact that you've got a medical background and that kind of thing. Because a lot of people are so caught up in the idea of going viral or doing something that's viral, and they don't understand that actually going viral is a bit of a double-edged sword. It's only great if you can go viral with your core audience.
If you can convert it to sales. So in a town of 45,000, I don't need 100,000 followers.
Yep.
I need like 2,000 very engaged followers who are going to come in again and again and again. So I'm about engagement, not about numbers.
Engagement is critical.
Yeah,
exactly. And in fact, with a small town in particular, viral doesn't mean getting tens of thousands of views. It means if you have a post that's gone viral, it has about 10 times the views or engagement of a standard, your average post. So in that sense, going viral in Orange would be perfect, but so long as it's with your audience. You don't want to go viral with like all the teenagers, for example, in Orange, because they're not your audience.
Not my audience.
Exactly.
So it's very tricky. That's one of the big learning curves, I suppose. Yeah. So I would say to people, know your market and know how you're going to brand yourself. What's your point of difference? Yeah.
Kylie, well, all of us in our businesses have those moments where we're brought to our knees and we're like, what the hell? Have you had any experiences that you could share where you just went, I don't think I want to do this?
Yeah, plenty. Plenty. Well, especially, it never stops. You can't sort of step away from it. So having family being sick or things like that, and you can't really be calling in sick unless you've got COVID, obviously. But also, I don't like having difficult conversations. So having to get rid of that person was really unpleasant, and I didn't like it. Also, yeah, there's been a lot. I'm trying to think of one of the most pertinent ones. There are days when you just wish you could go back to being an employee and just not have to carry all the load, but it's countered by the fact that you can now go to assemblies and things like that. But there are days where everyone just wants a piece of you and you're not delivering to anyone, and you just feel like, I'm not wearing any of these hats particularly well. I've got a lot of them, but I'm not really seeing any of them through very well. And as someone who prides himself on that, it's incredibly frustrating. It can literally bring you to tears.
And how do you, I was going to say, what gets you through those days, or how do you deal with those things when you can feel yourself, for example, shying away from, I'd really rather bury my head in the sand than have that difficult conversation?
Yeah, it's hard. It's very hard to do. And I suppose that comes with building a tribe around you and having a network. So my business coach, her background, she's actually a professional equestrian on top of other things, and she doesn't beat around the bush. So she drops a lot of F-bombs and lots of things like that. But I will often ring her. She will just effing get in there and effing do it. And I'm like, okay, yep, okay. Like, you gotta have people around you who are going to really, and she sees through. I give her the but, and what about, and she just cuts through all that bullshit really quickly and just says, no, get on and do it. So you need people in there who are going to give you that with love, give you the kick along that you need, because it's very easy to go, no, I'm going to save that conversation for tomorrow. She's like, no, that's happening today. Yeah,
I think of it as putting my big girl's pants on.
Sometimes I have to use that phrase so often at the moment. I've got to put my big girl pants on and get out there like daily, I would say.
But it sounds like she's great at helping you get your big girl pants on.
Yeah, and she cuts through
one leg at a time, Kylie.
Exactly. She cuts through a lot of it. I get bogged down in the branding or how we're running things. And she's like, you've been running for 6 months. It's been a global pandemic. You're just getting your feet on the ground. Like, calm the F down.
Yeah.
Put your big girl pants on. It's not complicated. Get in there, do your job. The money will, like, I'm like, okay, all right, cool, thanks. She had that talk with me just this morning.
Believe in yourself.
Believe in yourself. You've got this. So, yeah, you need those people around you.
It sounds really thin, doesn't it, when people say, look, Kylie, you've just got to believe in yourself. You've got this. It sounds really thin. It's like,
it can be enough to make you cry. You're like, thank you.
Kylie, there's, you know, not only the depths of despair in our businesses, but then we have some small joys and some big joys as well.
Yes.
When you have a win, what do your wins look like and how do you celebrate?
It's funny, they're not the kind of wins you would think, Alyssa. Like, you think a win would be smashing some financial target, and look, that would be a win on its own. But being able to turn up to you for your family is a win, absolutely. Also, this year I've been going to a lot of industry conferences. There's one, Cosmedic Con, that I've been going to for years since I started injecting, well, since it started, and I'd only been injecting for a few years. And to walk in there this year and be like, I own my own clinic, and to recognise people in the room and feel so much more comfortable in the industry, I think was a win. I feel like I'm sort of growing up or coming into my own. That was a real win. And once you scratch the surface of something you love, like, it really does make you get out of bed every day. I'm so excited about what we're offering, what we could do next, where we could go. Like, this collaboration coming up with the plastic surgeon, like, and the conversations I had at the Fresh Dinner the other night, like, they really fire me up. It's just the future only looks better and better, but not without its challenges. But yeah, it's exciting. It's very exciting.
It sounds like those wins are that professional satisfaction and that personal satisfaction of being where you should be.
That's exactly, much more succinctly and better said than myself. But yes, professional and personal wins they're definitely there.
The ones that make you do a happy dance.
Yeah, you feel like you do a happy dance, and it does get you out of bed in the morning. I've never been happier to come into work because it's mine and I've fashioned it the way I want to have it. So yeah, it's lovely.
Wow. And you said you've come away from Cosmedic Con and your networking event the other night with, you know, excitement for the future. What does the future hold for the Cosmedic Collective?
Yeah, it's a great question. I see us sort of going down. I think the future involves really breaking down a lot of those stereotypes and encouraging more education around what we've got, and bringing in new services as well once we're a bit more embedded. Eventually, my 3 to 5 year plan from here, because you always have to have a plan, have a goal. I feel like our hard work has been done in terms of setting up how we've chosen to run it, systems and processes. I'd really like to see this place going from strength to strength, and in keeping a regional focus, potentially open another Cosmedic Collective somewhere regionally, because I feel it would not be as hard the second time around, more of a rinse and repeat. So yeah, don't look too soon, but hopefully in the next 3 to 5 years, there may be a Cosmedic Collective somewhere else in regional New South Wales.
I love that idea.
Yeah, you've done a lot of the hard work with putting together all of your processes and things. So you have all of that.
The policies, the protocols, the systems, they're all there. And I don't see this industry going away. And I really feel that we are lacking it in regional New South Wales, but there is a demand for it, but there's a lack of education and a lack of availability.
Yeah, look, it's certainly proved itself to be pandemic proof, the cosmetic medicine industry, hasn't it?
That's right. I mean, even look at Sydney. Oh my God, some of my poor colleagues, they were down for what, like 3 months, 4 months. But it comes back, and it comes back with a boom. I don't know about you, Elizabeth. How many patients have you had to say, oh my God, Zoom, my face? Like, Zoom's been good for business.
Yeah, I think there's part of that, but I think a lot of it is we've actually been given the gift of some space and time to reflect. And I think that we actually were able during that time to work out A, what was important to us, and B, what self-care looks like. Because all of us were like on this mouse wheel, just running and running and running. And, you know, just going through our days, whether, you know, we're in the city at a desk job or whatever it was.
Exactly right.
But we've all had the opportunity to kick back and really reevaluate what's important for us.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There's a regionals publication that I subscribe to out here called Grazie Her, like Grazier, but with her. And there was a woman in there yesterday talking about self-care in the bush and women not giving themselves ability for self-care. And I think coming out of COVID, people have realised we've got to be a little kinder to ourselves.
I totally agree. Well, Kylie, you've been extraordinary. Thank you for taking the time out to speak with Kate and I today.
Thank you for asking me.
Oh, look, you're just totally an inspiration, and look, you just really energized me today. So I'm sure that our listeners have got so much out of listening to you.
I'm more than happy to answer any listener questions if they have any after this podcast. You can give out my email address.
Thank you so much.
That's so kind.
Very, very generous. So yes, on behalf of Kate and I, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.